I'm using Leary chemical partial file located on Canvas. Take a second to read through it. You'll notice the Excel spreadsheet doesn't have a lot of information. So again, pause the video and start inputting the data pieces in the problem into the spreadsheet. Okay, we'll keep going. Here I just gathered from the problem below the pieces of information that are just given, and I highlighted them in gray and outlined them in blue, just like our formatting says for a piece of data. My objective is to minimize cost. So this will be our first minimize problem in this course. My next step, I still want to figure out what my decision variables are. What do I have control over as the manager? Refer to those 3 guidelines in our opening handout if you need some help. Unlike the previous 2 problems that we've done, we don't have control about how much we produce. That is already given in this unit yield per hour. The only thing that I have control over is how many hours to run each process. So therefore my decision variables are the number of hours to run process 1, process 2. My constraints this time, we have demands that we must meet for each type of chemical. So I'm going to compare my actual to the minimum required for each kind of chemical. The actual that I produce must be greater than or equal to the minimum required. This is just data, so I'll format it that way. Each must be greater than or equal to. Now I'll calculate the actual units produced. This, I'm going to use the sum product of how many hours I run each process times its yield for that chemical. This is going to be the same for each chemical. So to save some time, I can highlight my cursor over the bottom right hand corner of a cell to where it's this black plus sign, and I can drag a formula down to save typing. I want to double check my last formula though. If I double click it, so the only thing, I wanted this to slide down, my yield for each chemical, but I want this box to stay locked in place over process 1, process 2. So it didn't quite work, so I'm going to delete those 2 cells. To fix this, when I drag this original formula down, again, I want the red box to slide down, the blue box to stay locked in place. To lock that in place, I highlight the cell reference of those cells, B15, C15 are my decision variables, and I hit the F4 key on my keyboard. It puts $ around both the letters and the numbers, and that will lock them into place. I'll hit enter. Now drag this down. Double click that last one to make sure it worked correctly. Perfect, it did. The red cell reference slid down when I dragged it down, but the blue decision variables locked in place. Finally, I want to put a formula for my objective. My objective is to minimize cost, so let's build a cost cell. We format the objective cell with a double outline border. The total cost is going to be another sum product formula. Again, we use this formula all the time in this course. A sum product of how long we run each process times the cost per hour. So how many hours should I run each process to get the lowest cost and meet all of my demands? Takes a while to try that out by trial and error, so we're going to use solver. Go up to your data tab and click the solver button. My objective is to minimize cost. Here we change the default maximum to now minimize that value. By the changing variables, select my decision variables. I want to add in my constraints. This time I can select all of them at once actually to save some time. All of these cells must be greater than or equal to the minimum required. So even though it's 3 constraints, I've added it in as just 1. Make sure this box is checked. That will ensure that we can't have negative values for process 1, process 2. We can't run the process for a negative amount of hours. That doesn't make sense. So check that box to make sure we have a positive solution. And then change our solving method to simplex linear programming. All these functions I just put in are linear functions. And click solve. We found a solution with all constraints satisfied. So the best decision for us as managers is to run process 1 for 3 hours, process 2 for 2 hours. That'll give us a minimum cost of $14.